Welcome to the program. Joining you from very, very sunny, very hot Northampton, Massachusetts today. We have not only indictments now, but also jailings of Trump staff in the Trump-Russia investigation. And it's not going away, and it's not ending anytime soon. Former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort has been sent to jail. And Paul Manafort, you might recall, was previously indicted, released on bail. I told you last week he was re-indicted for witness tampering charges. He was contacting people apparently via text, voice, and also encrypted message, and trying to influence what they were going to be telling investigators. And he has been charged, and a judge has now sent him to jail. Judge Amy Berman Jackson said, quote, "This isn't middle school. I can't take away his cell phone. If I tell him not to call 56 witnesses, will he call the 57th?" And he is now in jail. And we're going to get to Donald Trump's reaction in a moment. But I do want to remind you that all along we were told nothing will ever come of this, right? There's nothing to look into. There will be no charges. There will be no indictments. There will be certainly nobody going to jail or to prison. And of course, pretrial detention, which is what Paul Manafort finds himself in at this point, is not prison in the sense of a sentence, but it is somebody being held in jail because they simply weren't able to just behave like an adult and follow simple instructions from the judge, which include don't start contacting witnesses and potential witnesses and influencing their testimony, which is exactly what he did. Trump immediately both defending Manafort with logical fallacies, but also part of the idea is to distance from Manafort, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Donald Trump saying it's wrong to send Paul Manafort to jail because he has worked for other presidents. And actually, in one tweet, which I'm going to show you, Donald Trump, it's amazing. I know that now there's 280 characters in a tweet instead of 140. Trump has 4 glaring errors, including multiple logical fallacies in just one tweet. Trump tweeting, "Wow, what a tough sentence for Paul Manafort, who has represented Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other top political people and campaigns. Didn't know Manafort was the head of the mob. And what about," and he says, "what about Comey and Crooked Hillary and all of the others? Very unfair." So let's break this down piece by piece, because it's actually, in a sense, it's remarkable that he's able to insert so much nonsense into one tweet. First of all, Trump says that this is a sentence for Paul Manafort. Manafort hasn't been sentenced to anything, right? Manafort is being held pre-trial because of his behavior and a judge's decision. To call this a sentence confirms, I was going to say demonstrates, but it actually confirms the fundamental total lack of understanding of the American justice system that Donald Trump has. Secondly, Trump says that this is wrong to do to Paul Manafort because Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan. That's an ad hominem genetic fallacy. And you might think, well, David, ad hominem is when you insult someone instead of dealing with the argument. Ad hominem just means to the man, right? It means that it could be a positive or negative statement about an individual. In this case, it happens to be positive, but it's the same fallacy as saying oxygen is bad because Hitler breathed oxygen, right? That it's kind of a silly example. Here, it's Manafort is good and too good for jail because he once worked for Ronald Reagan. And of course, that's totally fallacious logically. Next logical fallacy is Trump says, I didn't know Manafort was the head of the mob. That is a straw man fallacy, right? Rather than saying why it's wrong to send Manafort to jail for the actual reasons Manafort is being sent to jail, Trump is defending Manafort by saying, this guy's not a mob boss, which is not an argument anybody made for sending Paul Manafort to jail. And then lastly, logical fallacy number 3 in this one tweet, Trump says, what about Comey and Crooked Hillary, right? The idea is, why is Manafort being held pre-trial if neither James Comey nor Hillary Clinton are in jail nor prison? And that's classic whataboutism, right? James Comey and Hillary Clinton haven't been indicted for anything. And in any case, even if they had been indicted, that wouldn't have any bearing on whether the right decision for Paul Manafort is to hold him pre-trial, because he's now accused in a second series of indictments of tampering with witnesses. And it's also just a really dumb argument in this case, because in general, people who haven't been charged with crimes don't get sent to jail, right? Like that's just, it's kind of a dumb argument that doesn't even make sense at its face. And meanwhile, so that on the one hand, there's this ludicrous and laughable defense of Paul Manafort, who's now in jail. At the same time, much like with Michael Cohen, the Trump attempts to distance the campaign from their own campaign chairman continue. Trump said during this bizarre pseudo press conference outside of the White House that, quote, Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign. There's two analyses there. One is that Trump's using the present tense, right? When he says Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign, that's technically true because Manafort is not currently involved with Trump's reelection campaign. He's in jail. So obviously he's not currently involved with Trump's campaign. But it's a distortion, right? Because Manafort was Trump's campaign chairman. Manafort ran Donald Trump's delegate strategy, which was a big piece of how he ended up winning by initially starting to pick up delegates here and there during the Republican primary. And don't forget that when it comes to Russia, Manafort was the guy who was pushing the Republican Party to harden their stance against Ukraine and to soften their stance on Russia, which they did right before the Republican National Convention in summer of 2016. So the distancing is totally transparent and bogus. And a really funny side note, most media outlets, when Paul Manafort was sent to jail, correctly reported the headline, which is Paul Manafort sent to jail. That's correct, right? Paul Manafort jailed, whatever phrasing you want to use. For at least a while, Fox News was reporting this as Manafort pleads not guilty to witness tampering, which is accurate, but it is not at all the most relevant and newsworthy part of the story. The relevant and newsworthy part is not only has this guy been indicted multiple times, he can't even keep it together enough while out on bail to stay out of jail. And the next thing I want to talk with you about is the insanity of the reactions to Paul Manafort being sent to jail, including by Alan Dershowitz, who has completely jumped the shark over the last year and a half.